Chapter 1. The Widow's Proposal. The evening sun bled orange and crimson across the plains, sinking low behind the jagged ridges that shadowed Dry Creek. Inside the town's only saloon, lanterns burned smoky light, throwing shadows across warped planks and dust that hung like a permanent fog. The piano clinked out a ragged tune, drowned often by laughter, card shouts, and the steady clatter of spurs against wooden floors. Elias Boone sat alone near the back wall, his hat brim tugged low as though he could fold himself into invisibility. He nursed a glass of watered whiskey, tracing the rim with his calloused thumb. He'd come for company, though the idea of speaking to anyone froze him tighter than the Montana snow. Men like him, plain, quiet cowboys with nothing but a horse and a patch of dirt, weren't the sort to catch eyes, until she walked in. Margaret Holloway, the widow, heads turned as she entered, her black dress hugging a figure both proud and weary, her gloves tucked at her side. She moved with a confidence that made the room fall still for half a heartbeat, though everyone knew she carried scars from a life that had cut her deep. Rumors said her ranch was failing, that vultures circled for her land. But no one expected her to stride past the card tables, past a bar, and stop at the lonely cowboy's table. "Mr. Boone," she said, her voice smooth as polished oak, carrying above a clatter of dice and glasses. Elias startled, nearly spilling his drink. "And Mrs. Holloway," he stammered, pushing his hat back with nervous fingers. "Didn't figure you'd notice me sitting here." She pulled out the chair across from him without waiting for permission, the wood scraping harsh against the floor. Leaning forward, her eyes, gray as storm clouds over prairie, locked onto his. The saloon's hum pressed closer, curious ears straining. "I need a man," she said low, so only he could hear, though the heat in her words cut sharper than any gunshot. "Not for talk, not for games. I need a man who can plant a seed of an heir, deep and steady." Elias froze. The words rattled inside him like loose shells in a box. He swallowed hard, his throat dry as desert sand. I ain't sure His voice cracked, and he forced a shaky laugh. "You must be mistaken. There's men here, men better suited." Her gloved hand brushed his wrist, halting the denial. "I've seen the way you carry yourself, Elias Boone. Quiet, steady, loyal. My land's in danger. My name's all I got left. Without an heir, I'll lose everything." The chatter around them swelled again, dice slamming, boots stomping to piano's tune. Yet Elias felt as if the world had narrowed to just her hand, just her storm-gray eyes. "I don't reckon I'm the kind of man you're looking for," he whispered, though even as he said it, his heart thundered like wild hooves in his chest. Margaret leaned closer, her breath warm with whiskey and determination. "You're exactly the kind I need. Think on it, cowboy. Think long and hard." She rose then, skirts brushing against his knee, and walked away with her chin high. The saloon swallowed her back into its chaos, but Elias sat rooted to his chair, his glass untouched, her words echoing in his bones like the last note of a hymn. Outside, the coyotes began to howl. Chapter 2. The Lonely Cowboy's Burden. The prairie wind was sharp that night, carrying with it the dry scent of sage and dust. Elias Boone rode slow beneath a sky littered with stars, the moon a thin silver coin hanging over the dark ridges. His horse's hooves thudded steady on the hard earth, but his thoughts were anything but calm. "I need a man." Her voice still clung to him, low and unyielding, like the crack of a whip. He tugged his reins tighter, muttering under his breath, "She don't mean me. Couldn't mean me." Yet his chest burned with the memory of her hand brushing his wrist, with the storm gray of her eyes fixed on him as though she saw deeper than he wanted anyone to. By the time he reached his cabin, the horizon was a pale band, the kind of color that comes before dawn. His home stood crooked on the edge of nothing, a shack of weather-worn pine, a fence half fallen, a lantern swaying in the night breeze. Elias swung down from the saddle, joint stiff, and unsaddled his horse with practiced hands. He gave the animal a gentle pat on the neck. "At least you don't expect nothing of me," he whispered. Inside, the air was cool and empty. A single chair, a cot shoved against the wall, a rough-hewn table with no food laid out. He poured water into a tin cup and drank slow, the silence pressing on him heavier than any gun. His mind drifted back, unbidden, to his boyhood, standing at the edge of a church gathering, too shy to join the other children at play. His father had died before he could remember him. His mother, worn and thin, had told him often, "Elias, you'll do best keeping quiet. Don't go both there and folks who don't want you." And he never had. He'd learned to ride alone, to eat alone, to live in the shadows where no one noticed. But tonight, Margaret Holloway had noticed. He sat heavily on the cot, running a hand over his jaw, rough with stubble. Could he truly be the man she asked for? A widow as strong and proud as her, with land, with fight in her blood? He looked at his hands, scarred from rope burns and broken fences, steady only when handling stock. Not the hands of a man who could carry a family name. Outside, coyotes yipped at the edge of the hills, their cries lonely and wild. Elias lay back, staring at the low ceiling beams, the night pressing in. Sleep refused him. He thought of her black dress, sweeping the floorboards of Saloon, of the way she hadn't looked at anyone else, only at him. The fire that had started in his chest back at the saloon smoldered, restless and hungry. He turned on his side, fists clenched, whispering into the dark, "Lord help me. I don't reckon I could be what she wants. But damn if I don't want to be." And the wind rattled the shack as though answering back. Chapter 3, Trouble on the Horizon. The morning sun was already burning white-hot by the time Elias Boone rode up the long dirt track to Holloway Ranch. Dust swirled behind his horse, the kind that clung to your clothes and throat, but he hardly noticed. His palms were damp against the reins, his jaw tight. He hadn't slept much since that night in the saloon, and Margaret's words pressed against him with every hoofbeat. The ranch spread wide before him, rolling pasture fenced in by weathered rails, barns patched from too many storms, and a house that stood proud though its paint had long since peeled away. Margaret was there, waiting by the corral, skirts hitched just enough to reveal boots caked in mud. She held the reins of a restless chestnut, her shoulders square, chin lifted like a general awaiting a soldier. "Mr. Boone," she called as he dismounted. "Didn't think you'd come." Elias adjusted his hat, eyes darting anywhere but her face. "Figured I ought to at least hear you out." "You'll do more than hear," she said, handing him the horse's reins. "You'll work." He blinked. "Work?" "Fence lines broken by the creek. You can mend it." Her gray eyes pinned him, sharp as a hawk's. "If you're half the man I believe you are, you'll show it with your hands, not just words." Elias swallowed hard, but something in her tone, steady, unyielding, lit that ember inside him again. He nodded. "Reckon I can do that." The day was long, the kind that baked a man's skin and left his shirt clinging with sweat. Elias worked the fence until his shoulders ached, hammering new boards, tightening wire, fixing posts that leaned like tired men. Margaret watched from a distance at first, arms crossed, then brought water and a shade of a smile when she saw how he never quit, never cut corners. By evening, the sky burned gold and purple. They stood side by side, looking at the mended stretch of fence. "You've got steady hands, Mr. Boone," she said softly. Elias shifted his weight, uneasy under her gaze. "Hands'ry, all I've got, ma'am. Ain't much else to me." Her lips curved faintly, but before she could speak, the thunder of hooves broke the quiet. 3 riders came fast up the trail, dust clouds curling around them. At their head rode Jed Callahan, broad-shouldered, with a face cut from stone and a sneer fixed permanent on his mouth. Well, Callahan drawled as he swung down, spurs jangling. Widow Holloway, I hear your land's getting mighty tired. Maybe it's time you let a real man take care of it. His eyes flicked to Elias, cold and mocking. And this is the one you got mending your fences? Boy looks like he couldn't fight off a prairie dog. Elias stiffened, hands curling to fists at his sides. The shame burned hot, the words cutting deep. He opened his mouth, but found no reply. Margaret stepped forward, her voice clear as church bells. This land is mine, Jed Callahan, and the man who stands with me is worth more than 10 of you. The ranch hands watching from the barn muttered approval, but Callahan only laughed, sharp and cruel. He spat in the dirt, close enough to Elias's boots, and tipped his hat mockingly to Margaret. Suit yourself, widow, but don't come crying when the vultures take what's left. He mounted and rode off, his men trailing like shadows, leaving behind the stench of arrogance and dust. Elias stood frozen, shame twisting in his gut. But when Margaret's hand brushed his arm, gentle, almost hidden, he felt something stronger than the insult, something steadier than doubt. For the first time, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, he was more than what the world had always told him. Chapter 4, Fire and Confession. The night was heavy with heat, the kind that made the prairie restless. Crickets chirped in wild rhythm, and the faint glow of lanterns flickered from Holloway Ranch. Elias Boone lay awake in the bunkhouse, staring at the rafters while the memory of Jed Callahan's sneer gnawed at his insides. Then came the smell, acrid, sharp smoke. He sat up fast. Outside, shouts tore through the night, and when Elias flung open the door, the world was lit in furious orange. The barn, Margaret's oldest, the one that sheltered her prize mare, was aflame, sparks flying high into the star-pocked sky. Fire! Someone hollered. Elias didn't think. His boots hit dirt before he knew he'd moved, the heat searing his face as he ran. Margaret was already there, her skirts whipping in the wind, a rifle clutched in one hand as if she'd fight the fire itself. Her eyes caught his glow, wild and desperate. "The horses!" she cried. "Elias, the mare is still inside." Without a word, he plunged to the smoke, the barn doors groaning against his shoulder. Heat roared like a furnace, hay crackling, beams groaning above. He coughed, covering his mouth with his sleeve, but pressed on until he reached the stall. The mare screamed, rearing in terror, eyes rolling white. "Easy, girl," Elias rasped, his voice breaking against the smoke. He looped the reins quick, steady, the way he always was with animals. His hand never wavered, even as fire rained embers around them. "Ain't gonna let nothing happen to you. Not tonight." With a final tug, he led her out into the night air, stumbling, soot streaking his face. The crowd of ranch hands cheered, but Elias only heard Margaret's gasp. She rushed forward, grabbing the reins with one hand and his arm with the other. "You fool!" she breathed, her voice trembling though her grip was strong. "You could have burned alive." "Couldn't just stand by," he managed, chest heaving. "Ain't my way." The fire raged behind them, but buckets passed hand to hand, water hissing against the flames. By dawn, the barn was a smoldering husk, black smoke curling like ghosts into the pale sky. Exhausted hands slumped where they stood, but Margaret remained upright, dirt and ash streaking her cheeks, her rifle still slung across her shoulder like a badge. Elias stood near, silent, his clothes scorched and hair damp with sweat. She looked at him, and something broke in her, some wall she had built to keep herself hard and unshaken. "I told you I needed a man," she said softly, the gray in her eyes stormy no longer but clear, like rain washing dust from the earth. I meant one to give me an heir. Truth is, I need someone steady. Someone who won't leave when the fire comes. Elias swallowed, the words lodging in his throat like stones. His hands shook, not from fear, but from the weight of what pressed on his heart. Mrs. Holloway, Margaret, he said, daring her name, ain't never been needed before. But if you'll have me, I reckon I've been waiting my whole life for a place to belong, for someone to belong to. Her hand found his, blackened with soot yet steady. Then stay, she whispered. Stay and be that man. The sunrise broke over the horizon, painting the ruins gold, and Elias Boone felt, for the first time, the stir of something stronger than fear. Hope. Chapter 5. The Duel at Dawn. Dry Creek woke before the sun. Word spread like wildfire. Jed Callahan had called Elias Boone out. A duel at first light, in the middle of town. Men gathered along the boardwalks. Women watched from upstairs windows. And the saloon swung its doors wide as though hungry for blood. Elias stood at the edge of Main Street, hat brim low, his boots sunk in the dust. He had slept little, but his eyes were clear, steady. The shy cowboy who once hid in the shadows of Saloon was gone. Margaret's hand still lingered on his skin from the night before, when she had whispered, "Stay and be that man." Now he meant to prove he could. Callahan strutted into the street, spurs clinking, his revolver riding high on his hip. He was broad as a bull, sneer fixed sharp as a knife. "Boone!" he barked, loud enough for all to hear. "I'll give you one chance. Turn tail and crawl back to your shack. Leave the widow's land to a man who can hold it." Elias lifted his head. His voice was quiet, but it carried. "Only one crawl-in here will be you, Callahan." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Margaret stood on the boardwalk, her black dress catching the dawn breeze, her storm-gray eyes never leaving him. He felt her gaze like a brand against his back, strength where he once had none. The sheriff, weary and pale, stepped between them. "Gentlemen, when the sun clears that ridge, draw." The world stilled. The sun crept, gold spilling over the rooftops. A dog barked and was silenced. Elias's fingers brushed the grip of his revolver, not shaking, not hurried. His heart pounded, but it was steady, deep as the earth. The first ray struck the dust. Callahan moved quick, hand flashing down, gun scraping leather. But Elias moved steadier. No rush, no panic. His revolver cleared the holster smooth as water running downhill, his arm straight, his shot thunderous. Callahan jerked back, shock etched across his face. His gun clattered into the dust as he stumbled, clutching his side, then collapsed into the street with a grunt. The silence that followed was heavy as stone. Elias lowered his gun, smoke curling from the barrel, and slid it back into the holster with a click. For a long moment, no one breathed. Then the crowd stirred, murmurs first, then voices rising, men tipping hats, ranch hands nodding with new respect. He turned, dust clinging to his boots, and found Margaret. She stepped down from the boardwalk, her eyes wet, her smile small but fierce. She reached for his hand in front of everyone, not caring who saw. "You're not the man I thought I needed," she whispered, voice trembling. "You're more." Elias's throat tightened. He bent his head close, his words for her alone. "Long as I live, Margaret, I'll be steady for you." And as the sun climbed higher, painting the street in gold, the lonely cowboy finally stood tall, no longer a shadow, but a man. Chapter 6. A Seed for Tomorrow. The smell of smoke still clung to Holloway Ranch, but this time it was not from ruin. It was from hammers striking nails, saws rasping, and the sweat of neighbors who had gathered to help rebuild. Word of Elias Boone's duel had spread across Dry Creek, and where fear once lingered, respect now filled the air. Children carried buckets of nails, Men raised new beams, and women laid out food on long tables in the shade of cottonwoods. The ranch, once thought doomed, pulsed with life again. Elias stood near the half-built barn. Shirt sleeves rolled, muscles straining as he lifted a post into place. His steady hands, blackened with dirt, guided it true. Margaret stood watching from porch, her dark hair caught in the prairie wind, her eyes softer than Elias had ever seen. When the last beam was set and the tools put down, the sun was sinking low, bleeding red and gold across the wide sky. A hush seemed to fall, as if the prairie itself leaned in to listen. Margaret crossed the yard toward him, her boots crunching in the dust. "You've done more than mend fences," she said, her voice carrying low and sure. "You've mended what I thought was lost." Elias shifted, brushing sweat from his brow. His shyness lingered like an old scar, but his eyes met hers without wavering. "Never figured I'd be good for much, Margaret. But standing here with you, reckon I found something worth fighting for." She stepped closer, close enough that the scent of sage and smoke between them felt like home. "That night in the saloon," she whispered, "I told you I needed a man who could plant a seed of an heir. I see now I needed more than that. I needed someone who wouldn't run, someone steady as the land itself." Her hand found his, fingers intertwining, rough palm against soft skin. The crowd around them cheered faintly, but neither noticed. The world had narrowed to just the two of them beneath the burning sky. Elias bent his head, his voice trembling but sure. "Then let me be that man, not just for today, but for every tomorrow." Margaret's eyes shimmered. She pressed her forehead to his, her whisper carried by the dusk breeze. "You already are?" And as the coyotes began their haunting cry on the hills, Elias Boone kissed her beneath the cottonwoods, the taste of dust and promise on his lips. The lonely cowboy had found his place, his family, and the woman who turned his silence into strength. The ranch stood steady. The love they had sown, like a seed in fertile earth, was ready to grow. The sun bled its last light across the plains, painting the sky in fire and fading gold. Holloway Ranch stood quiet now, rebuilt and steady, the air heavy with the scent of sagebrush carried on the evening wind. Horses whickered softly in the corral, and from town, faint strains of saloon piano drifted on the breeze. Elias Boone leaned against the fence, hat in hand, the dust of the long trail still clinging to him. He had walked through fire, through fear, through Callahan's bullet, and he was still here. No longer the shadow of a man, no longer alone. Margaret stepped from the porch, her dress catching the sunset glow, her eyes storm-gray yet warm. She crossed the yard with sure steps, stopping before him, close enough for him to breathe in the faint perfume of wood smoke and wildflowers. "You came a long way, Elias," she whispered, voice trembling with something deeper than pride. He met her gaze, steady now, and took her hand. "Didn't reckon I was worth much, but with you, I found where I belong." Her smile broke like dawn over plains. She pressed her forehead to his, her words soft but unshakable. "Then stay. Stay forever." As the coyotes howled their wilding, Elias kissed her beneath the burning sky, and in that kiss lay every promise of tomorrow, rooted deep, steady as the land itself.